thanks to the team for allowing me to be here. This has been a great opportunity. And also Josh, too, for setting the stage. A lot of great information there, a lot of information that I use, and also talking about the target plant concept. I'm going to talk about that and the seed lot selection tool, which is something that I've used. And there's a lot going on that tool. And I want to say, like, if you need help, just reach out. Also, too, in my office where I sit, one of the makers of the tools is like several offices down, and it was just nice for me to be able to walk down to his office and say, "What does this mean? You know, how should I set this up in a logical fashion to get a meaningful output?" And when it happens, it's great. It's a good thing. So we're talking about the pipeline today, and I'm privileged to be here to talk about the nursery section of the pipeline. This is a roadmap of which I'll cover for my talk. I'll talk target plan concept, just as Josh mentioned. Stock type choices, I'll give an overview on that. Nursery production and seedling quality. Again, just a short amount of time, so just a lot of high level stuff. I won't even cover everything on my screen. I'll probably be going so fast to keep time. The last 2 points there are some of the resources that cover not only Josh's presentation, but mine and Owen's as well. My colleague and friend and the Western Nursery Specialist on our team, Nabil Kaduri, will be covering those in a later section. So with that, I'll just start my presentation because I am a seedling guy and I'm a nursery guy. I always like to start this out. Seedlings are the building blocks for nearly all healthy forests and landscapes. Even if the building blocks are tiny like that, eventually they become big ones and the foundation for what we're looking for in our goals and in our applications. And by seedlings, I don't always just refer to nursery produced seedlings, but also to naturally produced seedlings, because sometimes target plants are the ones that you want nature to produce, or you maybe want seed to produce all on their own. But for the sake of this presentation, it's solely based on nursery stock and how we use nursery stock as a tool in the toolbox for our reforestation objectives. And I just want to point this out, and probably a lot of you know this, but nursery is a pretty good tool. It's really good at flexing the phenotypic plasticity of what seedlings can do. So this picture illustrates 2 different scenarios. On the left, you see 3 little seedlings circled in red. Those seedlings germinated in nature and are approximately 1 season old. And don't get me wrong, nature knows how to do things best. Those seedlings, you know, given they get past the establishment phase, will go on to do great things. But in certain situations, we need to provide a little boost in situations where maybe we don't have enough seed nearby, or maybe the landscape has changed dramatically enough to where seeds may not have a chance if they germinate on their own. So nurseries, again, can do something pretty fantastic, in which these seedlings that you see in the center of your screen are, you know, for example, 1 season old as well. And those 2 seedlings, or those seedlings you see there, are also grown in the same greenhouse from the same seed lot in roughly the same amount of time. So we can have a lot of culturing tools in the nursery to create different sizes and shapes that help us meet our restoration, reforestation goals. Keep in mind that all has to do with species and being able to work within the species constraints, the genetics of those species. And then there are other factors involved too that help us dictate the size and shape of the seedlings that we're trying to produce, which I'll cover. So the target plant concept, as Josh illustrated earlier, is just something near and dear to my heart. I feel is like the roadmap for what we're doing. It's a good place for us to answer questions and make sure that we're in a process that we don't forget key things along the way. I have this simple version of the target plant concept illustrating that it's a feedback loop as well, right? We want to make sure that this is a continuing process in which we define materials, we produce them, we put them in the field, we see how they grow, we evaluate them, and then when we go back and do this again, we've got all that information which we gathered and we can do it better. Okay, so now here's the more complicated version, which doesn't illustrate that feedback loop quite as well. But I want to point out here that the target plant concept relies on a lot of factors. Again, the roadmap that you need to consider for creating your plant material for your successful project. The 3 things at the top are probably the guiding factors that will make sure that this is successful or not. And one of the primary things is communication, and that the nursery that you're working with and the client have a partnership and communicate with one another. Both of them have a lot of expertise in their individual areas, but unless you work together to leverage each other's strengths, it won't work out as well. The other thing I want to point out too is the outplanting site. Where these seedlings are going to end up dictates a lot of what your plant material is going to look like. And then we want to also make sure that high quality seedlings are actually going into those sites so that they can do the job they want to do. But the rest of the concept outlines a lot of questions that we can use to help formulate what a target plant is when we go through this iterative process. So it's just some key take-home things. The target plant concept, it helps us understand the dynamics that contribute to successful reforestation, or in this case, rapid seedling establishment. I like to think of this as an opportunity to identify the factors that interrupt the processes of natural ecosystem functioning, or what are those things that, like Josh mentioned, what are those things that want to kill my baby trees? We want to, I think I heard a saying once, it was like, I don't know, it was like a saying that's like, there's one way to produce a seedling. There's like 20 different things that want to kill your seedling or something like that. It's like there's a lot of things out there that want to disrupt that process. But the target plant concept can help us design a seedling that can help us kind of like overcome some of those limiting factors. And then we implement a plan by communicating and working with our nursery. And this is what we're looking for. We're looking for when we put a plant in the ground, we have simultaneous things happen. We have a high quality seedling that has foliage that can photosynthesize and allocate carbon. We have roots that are healthy and ready to willing to grow and take up water. And all these things are working simultaneously so that the plant can couple with the site that it's planted on and then do its job. And this is also a positive feedback. So this is kind of what we're shooting for when we talk about producing seedlings, putting them in the ground and having them high quality so that they can do the jobs they're intended for. So building a target seedling, I like to say, you start at the outplanting site. Again, we can flex the muscles of what the seedling is capable of, and we can use the tools in the toolbox of nurseries to express what those sizes or shapes or physical nature of these seedlings are. And it really depends on a lot of things, though, when we think about this. It depends on species. It depends on the container that we choose also as well. And then also that species container interaction. If you choose a large container, for example, some species may not grow fast enough to fill the entire space of that container within a growing system, or within a growing season. So that's something to consider. So time in the nursery is important. It's also important to consider what your outplanting window is. And also there are things like budgets, but then, when we think of the options that are out there, we start to think, wow, there are a lot. But then we also have to think about some of the logistical constraints that we're faced with, including what some of the limitations are of some of the equipment that we have at the nursery, for example. I mean, just because we may want like something like this gigantic ponderosa pine that you see here doesn't mean that we can produce that in a logical manner with the equipment that's available at the time either as well. So working, again, communicating what the needs are and realizing what your limitations are to leverage the strengths and resources. I started getting involved in like analyzing different stock types a long time ago. And even a long time ago, there was a lot of choices out there. We used to have a display here at the nursery close by to me at the University of Idaho, and it was a full wall of all these different container types that seedlings could be grown in. And that was then. And now we have even companies that are still designing new container types to produce seedlings in. And so what I've found is despite all the years that we've been working on these things, people still have a lot of questions as to which system they should be using, which is the best for their application. So if you find yourself asking this question, it's logical. It's not new, and it's something that we definitely should be talking and having conversations about. Yeah, new container types are coming up all the time, and new ways of getting seedlings to survive. So seedling stock type choices. I was kind of asked to kind of maybe go over at a high level what we might be thinking of when we're choosing what stock types we're using in the nursery. And so the recommendations that I'll kind of glance over here real quick come from the literature, and they come from experience. But for dry outplanting sites, some of the research that I've done and some of the stuff that I've seen in the literature, as well as the experiences I've talked to folks are that long root systems can do well on dry outplanting sites, and for those reasons are this illustration that you see at the top of the screen here. It's logical in some areas that the deeper you go in the soil moisture, deeper you go in the soil profile, you're likely to have more persistent moisture. And so if you have a seedling that has a longer root system, that seedling may have access to that water for a greater length of time as opposed to a seedling with a shorter root system. And I put an asterisk next to this because it is logical and it does make sense, but also from a target plant concept approach, this isn't always the logical choice for your outplanting site. If you're choosing, if you have an outplanting site that has maybe some dry conditions, you may also have shallow, short, rocky soils. And so it doesn't make sense to buy a seedling with a long root system if you can't get it in the ground. And the illustration down below that graphic shows where seedlings with long root systems were planted in shallow soils. And even though the goal was to get seedlings with long root systems deeper in the soil profile to access moisture, when they were planted by the contractors, they planted them improperly because of the shallow soils, and now you're faced with this challenge right off the bat. Some other things that go along with this are larger root systems. We think of seedlings with larger root systems, they have more roots available to explore the surrounding soil around them. So that is, they have the opportunity to grow roots into areas that have more moist soil or more available water. And then another thing for dry outplanting sites is favorable shoot to root ratios. We want to make sure that seedlings are balanced in their ability, again, like that establishment model graphic that I showed earlier. They're balanced in their ability to be able to take up water and also be able to photosynthesize and then transpire without losing too much water at the same time. So you see the seedling on the far right, really tall, really short root system. That, for example, may not have a favorable shoot to root ratio for a dry outplanting site because it's got a lot of shoot area, a lot of potential transpirational loss of water area compared to the amount of roots that it has. However, though, in a situation where you may have an outplanting site with lots of vegetative competition that you might not be able to knock down with herbicides or treat in other ways, it has been shown that seedlings that are taller that can compete for the available light might be better. So that's a situation where a stock type that has a tall shoot might be more favorable. So again, just a few more just general trends, large seedlings. Some of the literature and some of my research has shown that they tend to maintain their size advantage over time. So that's something to think about. They tend to be a little more robust and more capable to withstand physical damage, sorry, but they are more expensive. They're more expensive to produce in the nursery. They take up more space. They take up more soil media and more nutrients, for example. And so they cost more. And then also, you know, that cost translates over into shipping and also translates over into planting expenses as well. On the other hand, small seedlings can do well on mesic sites if you're not too worried about soil moisture being a limiting factor, a severely limiting factor. Small stock, high quality stock can grow really well, can grow very well equally. They're cheaper because they take up less resources in the nursery and they take up less space in the nursery. So the cost per square foot goes down and they're easier to plant as well. And so the picture that I have on the far right here, that's a picture of me like probably 10 years ago, measuring a site where I planted 4 cubic inch seedlings and then also 8 cubic inch seedlings. And you can see after 10 years, that is a slope right there. Those two different seedlings grew the same. And so here we have, you know, we could spend less money on small seedlings that will do just equally as well. Over the years, we've done a few examples, like a few back of the napkin analyses, economic analyses on cost per seedling, because we know that, you know, oftentimes budgets dictate what you're choosing. And in the case where we had some like long-term data where we were looking at the analysis of bare root versus container. Container seedlings were more expensive. They had a higher survival rate compared to bare root seedlings, which were probably 15 to 20% less survival rates. But when you consider all other variables, including like shipping and cost to plant and some of the other things involved, if you do some economic analysis, you may see that in some cases you can, in fact, choose bare root seedlings, but just plant more, and the cost for surviving seedling could be about the same or even more favorable. So it's important to kind of think about things in those regard when it comes to stock type choices as well. So notes on stock types, because I got to keep flying along here. There's lots of possibilities. If you're thinking about exploring those possibilities, take a look at the literature. There are a lot of stock type studies that have been done out there. I don't think there are a lot in the Southwest, but there have been stock type studies that have been done in similar climates that would have some applicability. I always like to say, ask the experienced professionals, ask the nursery growers, and ask the people who work in the field and are planting seedlings what their experiences are with different types of stock types. You can get a lot of information there. Communicate with your nursery as well. Find out what they're good at growing and what kind of feedback they've gotten on different stock types for different scenarios over the years as well. That's pretty valuable. I think some of the Forest Service nurseries, years ago, I got to take part in what they have called is the clients meeting, where the nursery gets all the foresters together and gets to talk about the situations of what worked in the nursery and what worked in the field, what didn't work, all again to kind of help improve the process so that they're sharing information to improve the target plants for the next times around. Stock type studies are another way to gather information. A lot of folks maybe like to think about doing this on their own. I think it's kind of cool to be inquisitive and do this type of stuff. You know, if you have the opportunity, sure, you can do it. But I do want to say be careful. Stock type studies are, to do them right, they're really, really difficult to do. So a while back, and I didn't figure that out until I started to take a deep dive in that. But if you're starting to think about doing something on an outplanting site, maybe contact myself or Owen or Josh or even Nabil, because there are certain things that you can put into play ahead of time so that you don't fall into the pitfalls of what I would say previous stock type studies that the data aren't very good in. So again, something to think about. So now I'm going to shift gears and go into quality seedling production. You know, nurseries, they produce seedlings. It's easy to do, right? You know, you just get some seed, you just water them, provide some fertilizer. Maybe you read a manual or two and just blammo, all of a sudden you've got good high quality seedlings ready to go in the ground. I think that's kind of always been the joke. And this is the cover of a nursery manual from 1979. So this kind of a joke has been around for a while. And in fact, I was just talking about this with another colleague. She manages a nursery, and she was just thinking like, wow, I often think of this cartoon in my brain I didn't know exists, but this is often how I feel. Like, how did I pull that off, or how did that happen, or whatever. But in fact, there's a lot more that goes into this. But I do want to come back to this manual as well. I keep this close at hand on my desk because there was a question earlier that talked about seed calculations and the amount of seed to use per cell and germination rates. And this book from 1979 has these tables in the back that are all probability tables that are all pre-calculated, and they go through everything. Germination percent, the amount of seeds per cell, and the amount of expected empty cells that you might expect versus filled cells in your nursery. So this is like, it's old document and it's super basic and just using a table, but it's really, 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 really functional. So anyways, it's not just the magic to produce quality seedlings. I appreciated Josh earlier showing that seed and seed collection and seed management is much more complicated than we would typically think. It's the same thing for nursery production. There's a lot going on there. And it requires a lot of skill and knowledge to produce seedlings. And so this is why it's important to think about and make relationships with your nursery growers, and also give them a break from time to time, because they're balancing a lot of things to try and produce seedlings for your projects. So and a lot of it doesn't have to do with just irrigation and fertilizer, for example. I mean, you know, we're talking about pest management. We're talking about administration and budgeting that are taking time away from the production of seedlings and whatnot. Anyways, so nursery production is a pretty complicated thing. There's a lot of skill and knowledge. And I think timing is one of the things I want to emphasize for today's conversation. Timing is everything. And I didn't put this graphic up here just to show a bunch of pretty colors or just to make your eyes go crazy or whatever. But I wanted to put this up here because this comes from one of our manuals. This illustration kind of gives you a full picture of how long it might take to produce a species in a certain container size, from seed collection all the way to outplanting. And I like to show this because I think what the message is start at your outplanting site, right? Start talking about your outplanting window, and then look at this kind of chart and work backwards to see how long it's going to take to get to that, see where you need to start planning to get to that outplanting window. And this is particularly important for the Southwest, as planting windows can be anywhere from the monsoon season or on into the fall. So thinking about when you're getting those seedlings into the ground, how much time the nursery needs to produce those quality seedlings, whether it's a shortened amount of time or a lengthened amount of time, is really important. So it's important to consider that these things take time. Nursery, the nursery can flex the muscles of those seedlings to different sizes and shapes, based on their understanding of nursery culture and growth stages. But we can compress those timelines or lengthen those timelines, but it's important that we try and maximize each one of these stages so that we can get to a quality seedling in the end. We have to have a certain amount of time for establishment, but then we have this period where we can grow things rapidly, based on the species. And then we have a period of time where we have to give them a little bit of tough love before they head out the nursery. And there are some cool practices that Josh and Owen and I have worked on over the years in growing seedlings and conditioning them in the nursery for dry outplanting sites. And so there's a lot of different tools that nursery growers can use during this culturing phase, that are cutting edge. So understanding nursery culture and growth stages. One of the things I did want to talk about was holding over stock as well. This is something that I've seen not only in the Southwest, but other places. Sometimes we miss our outplanting windows, and sometimes we have to hold stock over. And there have been some cases where I've seen stock is held too long, and we really want to be careful from a seedling quality standpoint that we don't hold our stock too long in certain types of containers, because if you do, you lose seedling quality, you lose stress resistance, and your chances of having a seedling establish rapidly and grow well on the site kind of go down. So you look at these plants down on the bottom here, they've been held too long, their shoots are really tall, their roots are probably compacted, and if they go out on a dry site, there's a chance they might not do too well. So seedling quality is important, working that magic in the nursery to make sure your seedlings have all the right functions, morphologically, physiologically, and that they can perform. We have classes of plant quality that we measure in the nursery and in the field. They come in morphological quality assessments, physiological assessments, and performance assessments as well. I'm just going to kind of run through these real quick, and I probably need to go faster than real quick. So seedling morphology, Owen says it's fine. Owen, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? Or Lauren? 2 minutes?
Yeah, we're supposed to start Q&A now, but why don't
Okay.
you keep going? Folks can put
All right.
some questions in the chat, and
No
yeah, so you can
questions.
have up to 5 minutes if you need it.
Okay. Morphology has been a standard of seedling quality measurement. It's great because the morphology measurements don't change over time, but often when we look at seedlings, we don't know what lies underneath. Like there can be some physiological mechanisms that can be compromised, so I want to caution there. But it is our standard for grading in the nursery. They include a lot of the measurements that you see here, but I like to think of morphology as proxies for physiological functioning. So, again, green needles, great photosynthesis, large stems, good plumbing systems for moving water and nutrients. So those correlations have been shown over time, to show success and growth in the field. Seedling physiology is like us going to the doctor. It can be used to assess health, injury, or stress. But these types of measurements are really laborious. They're not easy. And these things can change over time from the nursery to the outplanting site. So that's important to keep in mind. But they do support a lot of the morphological measurements. And they require some specialized equipment to do. They can inform us on seedling development. We do have a lot of correlative studies that show what these physiological measurements do for us. But again, measuring them at the right time for that snapshot is important to understand. Seedling performance is another attribute. I think I'm going to skip that for now, but I want to put some notes on seedling quality is that there's a lot of different quality measurements out there. Morphology is the standard in which we kind of hold to. But I think it's up to the nursery manager and the seedling user to both talk about all that data and to collect that data and to use that data over time to make assessments on how the seedlings are performing as they come out of the nursery and as they're going into the ground. So I'm going to try and wrap up. Target plants for success. The nursery stage is super, super important. Identifying quality attributes is also super important. The target plant concept is a great tool to help us through some of these stages and choosing stock types and whatnot. And then I want to say, realize that all this stuff is interdependent. And when you get changes that happen even from the seed stage to the nursery stage, it affects everything downstream. So work together, communicate, constantly learn, and hopefully we don't have to resort to this as our target plants, these plastic pines in this really harsh environment, or these shrubs growing in front of these pubs and these plastic shrubs in concrete containers. We don't want to resort to that as our target plant. This is a manual that is a great resource for everything that I just breezed through super, super fast. That's me. Thanks.